Have you ever felt stuck, blocked, or that something you can't quite put your finger on is preventing you from getting the business and personal outcomes that you desire? My returning guest and business healer, Marte Siebenhar, struggled with overwork and burnout for years. As she sought and applied a variety of tools to help herself, she developed insights into how our unconscious mental and emotional blocks influence and limit the results we produce at work. Eventually, she developed a way to heal and release what was holding her back while transforming her relationship with and performance at work. Today, she works with high achieving professionals to help them overcome burnout and amplify their success while working fewer hours with greater joy and purpose. In this episode, Marty and I discuss how she blends her professional experience with ancient spiritual practices into a unique approach to healing the relationship with ourselves and our work, why it's useful to identify and heal our internal blocks to prosperity, how to reduce overwork and burnout, how she integrates skills she learned in her previous life as a professional classical musician into her work today, and how taking action and developing a consistent process is the most powerful approach to manifest something in the world. Let's dive in. Marta, it's great to have you back in at Making Business Art. Thanks so much for being on here today.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be back.
Yeah. So we spoke all the way back in episode number 2. And so here you are, a couple of years later. And so, first of all, before we jump into the topic of the day, just give me a quick update. Like, what has changed in your work life since episode 2?
Well, a little bit of a lot because I changed my company name and I changed the nature of my work. So I'm now the business healer and I'm doing work that incorporates energy healing and using energy as a tool for business and still working with individuals and companies and getting a lot of joy out of teaching people how to use energy as a business tool. So it's going great. It's really fun. And I feel really nurtured by the work. So it's been a great experiment that started in January of 2023. So I've been at it for about 2 years now, and it's just delicious. What else can I say?
Yeah, and I remember seeing the rebrand and just feeling like, oh, that's so interesting. And of course, I've seen you on the socials, and then we've gotten together in person a few
Sure.
times, which has also been great. And so we're going to be talking about energy, but also for people that maybe don't lean into the woo as much. I think there's some really interesting psychology if they just want to take it as a reframe of what they're doing,
Sure.
which is tremendously useful as well. So I think you can play in one of the two or just combine both and just make it
Yeah.
more powerful for yourself. Yeah, so let's get into this. Business healing. That's a really interesting frame. I don't recall ever coming across that before. So it's very unique, at least to me, and probably to a number of listeners. How do you define the term and approach this practice?
Yeah, great question. So my experience is that the things that interrupt us and disrupt us in our personal lives, we do not check those when we walk into work, or in my case, when you found a company. I work with a lot of founders. I think maybe 88 or 90% of my clients are founders, and they run their own businesses, and many of them are spiritual, but not all of them are spiritual. But we're just looking at the stuff that's inside you that causes pain, that causes irritation, that causes fear, anxiety, freezing, whatever it happens to be, overworking. I just did a seminar on overworking this week and it was really beautiful. But yeah, all the things that are happening inside us mentally and emotionally, they're also happening outside, whether or not we recognize that. So my work is really for people who are feeling stuck or feeling blocked or feeling that there is another level or another layer of
Mhm.
things that they recognize as kind of standing in the way for them feeling really fulfilled, really aligned with their purpose, or getting the kinds of business and personal outcomes that they desire. So, and I always talk about the 4 root causes of feeling stuck, the 4 root causes of blocked prosperity, and I can go into those if you're interested, but those are really at the heart of what I do because when good people are feeling liberated and free from shame, guilt, pain, overworking, anxiety, people pleasing, they do good things in the world. When they are prosperous and when they're flourishing and thriving, they create amazing things. They create change. So that's what business healing is, just helping leaders understand that things that are invisible are things that you can use, including your mindset, right? So it's not only energy, but it is the energy of your mind power, your emotional power, and even we bring into it generational patterns and some other things.
Mhm.
Like we can't see thoughts and feelings, but we know that they have a big role in our lives. So we're just looking at the dimension of our thoughts, our feelings, and things we may be unconsciously carrying with us that are keeping us stuck or blocked or not living the prosperity or the thriving that we want. So that's what we start to unpack, starting with mindset work. And some of my clients do the energy work as well. I'm a pranic healer, and
Mhm.
we work through the energy body, and people get faster results according to what I've
Sure.
observed than just talking or simply wanting to do better, but falling into these patterns that were never really logical to get out of. So we use energy as a tool rather than logic, because if logic could solve it, pretty much everybody would be free from these things. So they're made of energy, thoughts, feelings, anxiety, it's all made of energy. So we use energy to disintegrate and remove those
Yeah.
from our lives.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of, if we want to also combine with psychology, a lot of like unconscious patterns and internal states
Yeah.
that we might not be able to recognize or differentiate because they're so familiar to us. It's kind of like the norm. And then we might not recognize that there's this self talk or voice that's kind of repeating and perpetuating like a belief or a message that makes life harder for us in some ways.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to touch on because I thought it was so interesting this one time that we did something together. Tell me more about our our business, like the metaphor for business and the relationship with our business.
Ooh. Yeah. So I kind of look at it from a metaphysical standpoint, which
Mm-hmm.
is we use a lot of terms and we just use them and we don't really think about where they came from. But a corporation literally comes, the root word comes from the word body, like corpus,
Mm-hmm.
right, from Latin. And when you have a corporation and it, like the word means body, you have to think about, is there a correlation between what's happening in your business and what's happening in your body? And again, I'm mainly working with small business owners and
Mm-hmm.
founders. So what's happening with you, very much you are shown constantly what's happening in your business, the things inside you that you need to attend to or that you need to learn, right? So the second part of that is when we actually form a business, often you go on the state site to incorporate your business, and it is called like a business entity. And something interesting about the metaphysics is that an entity, according to the definition, I forget which dictionary I looked this up, or maybe it was just Google, but an entity is something that has its own independent consciousness. So when you really start to think about a business as having its own independent consciousness, that starts to be something you're working with. You're not working for or working at. You are kind of interacting with it and you are influencing it. It's influencing you. They say that when quantum particles are observed, they do different things. So even if quantum particles can have consciousness, I believe a business can have consciousness. And I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you felt a little resentment or anger toward a particular boss or particular workplace and things started to go a different direction in a negative direction. Well, I
Mm-hmm.
believe that your business is a living, breathing entity that is very responsive to what you're sending to it. So, again, working with a lot of small business owners and founders, if there are things that are frustrating people about the things they have to do in their business, that energy is being sent to your business and your business is responding to it. So, it's really looking at a higher awareness, not necessarily higher because something is lower, but just like more aware of and mindful of how we interact with our words, our feelings, our actions, and how we communicate about what we do. A lot of people, when they come to me, they're frustrated or they're stuck or they're blocked or they're frozen. And we have to really look at how those energies, especially when they're on repeat, are impacting what's happening inside the business because I believe those things are actually related and responding to one another. So we can't just look at business as a one way direction. it's really something that is cyclical. It's really something that is a give and a take. It's a relationship.
Yeah. Well, the receiving end of that, just to reflect here on what you're sharing, just makes me think of like say like a small restaurant. Like you walk in and there's a vibe that is really fed by the leadership, and then it also that flows through the staff. And if the leadership is, let's just say, if the behavior from leadership is not, let's just flatten this and just say positive, then the staff is going to feel it. They're going to reflect that back and pass that on to customers. And I've been in places where, and we live in Miami, both of us, right? So
Yeah.
particularly in restaurants, some people there's some entrepreneurs, some restaurateurs that might invest a lot in interior design, but you still walk into a restaurant and the vibe is off, the service is not good, and I think that leads to like a bigger disappointment because you see like this very nice space, so it kind of is promising like, hey, this is gonna be a nice experience, and then the service is really off, and then you kind of leave and you don't come back. Or at least that's what I end up doing like a number of times, versus going to a little hole in the wall place that's like more modest, but then the service is great, the people are super warm, very nice, the food is on point, and you just go back over and over because it's just a good time.
Yeah, and that really taps into a lot of what I work with, which is the optics can be fantastic. Something can look
Hmm.
successful, but if the energy isn't matching that, everybody knows. It's kind of like when you walk into a room and you realize people have been talking about you, or you walk into a public place and you get that somebody was just there who was angry. There are these cues that you don't have to be psychic or in the energy or woo at all
Hmm.
to know that there's something happening that's not quite lining up. And I love what you brought up because it really tracks with what I've learned in the corporate world and the nonprofit world, which is leadership is about energy.
Hmm.
The beliefs of the people in charge and how they live their values and what they value, and anything inside them that may not be totally healed and thriving, all of that goes into culture. I joke with my clients sometimes that if we're looking at toxic culture and they're either setting culture and wanting to avoid toxicity, or they're kind of middle management or senior management, but not the number one, and they're experiencing some degree of a culture that they don't enjoy, we start to look at what is happening inside. Because for me, shorthand, whatever's unhealed and ugly inside the leadership is going to show up in the culture. And I don't know why that happens, but it's like the collective wounds of leadership set and become
Yeah.
the culture. And that's where it's like you can say all the great things in the world, but if there is people pleasing behavior or not enough behavior in terms of like, I feel inadequate, so I will operate a certain way and then expect that of my team, that shows up in the culture. And it starts with
Hmm.
leadership. They say leadership
Yeah.
is lonely. But the funny thing is, it's not only lonely, it's like what is happening inside you as the top leader is on view to everybody else through the culture, whether or not you're conscious of it. So this stuff is very powerful, and you can look the part, but
Hmm.
if you look the part and then everyone, like, you can't keep staff, that might be an indication that there's something happening inside that's not visible that is actually creating a whole lot of results in terms of our team.
Yeah. Well, and I think also the thinking out there is that people don't leave companies, they leave managers, right? They get away from a boss that is really not good for them in whatever way, like health wise, etc. And perhaps you've also, I mean, I've seen this, and possibly you've also seen bosses that leave, and most of their team soon thereafter leave behind them, and they kind of keep their team in some way, like throughout their career, because just people really like working with them, like things click, and the
Yeah.
experience is so instead of leaving the managers, they're just following the manager wherever they go because it's a good time.
Well, and in that way, it's like the body travels with itself, right? Like the team becomes an integrated thing. And so that makes sense. And when I'm working with companies, it's often when they're experiencing change, there's some sort of
Hmm.
fracture, or there's an issue that came up, or there's a breach of trust. And so in those situations, it's like, well, we have to get back to what does trust even mean? And like, how do we recognize how to create trust? And that usually involves being vulnerable. And for some people, it's like, I go to work, so I am not vulnerable. But when we are
Hmm.
really looking at the energetic aspect, it's not as hidden as you might think what's really happening with people, because anybody who's energetically sensitive or empathic is going to pick up on that stuff. And when things are really thriving and they're really going great, man, that's a really special culture to have. But I find that those leaders tend to be the people who are self curious and who are working on themselves and create a place where they sometimes are vulnerable in front of their team, because we're all human in the end and we want to do great business, but we also want to feel like we can be human and show up as not an infallible person, but somebody who really can just bring their gifts and fulfill their purpose and have a sense of satisfaction and contributing to something.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just remembering a story of somebody from a grad school where it wasn't necessarily somebody quite like in a position of leadership, but it was a story of like a legendary staff person who could make a phone call to like anybody and they would pick up the phone and come through with like an ask or a favor or something from like after decades of work. So something from like somebody from 20 years ago would pick up a call and just do whatever the person asked because they had like that much goodwill across like
Heart.
generations of people, really.
Yeah. And that's really where
Mm.
the quote from, I think it's Maya Angelou, says, people will forget you, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. I'm really
Yeah.
paraphrasing. I have to check that exactly what it is, but that's the energy, right? So part of how we treat people is how we feel like we deserve to be treated. And slowing that down in business is something that's really important. We can't really think about user experience, customer experience if we're totally consumed with ourselves. We really have to think
Mm.
about and advocate for how our energy is showing up and be very honest. If the energy isn't there for the customer, probably not going to be a positive experience for them. So it's
Yeah.
really, there's so many layers. It's so interesting how this energetic layer can really be applied to almost every aspect of business, including your communications. Like, I work a lot with people who are starting things, and when they are starting, I was speaking with my own coach, and she's like, when you start out, everything is drama, right? Like, everything feels like a big deal because you don't have the
Mm.
experience to know and navigate and make the small decisions. Eventually, you want to be making big decisions. But when you're moving through space and having to make these big decisions, so when you're first starting out, you
Mm.
probably don't feel so confident, especially if you're selling something for the first time and you don't have any experience selling that thing. So it's funny, there's a particular entrepreneur I've worked with, and confidence of the message is really something that I feel like people can tune into. So when
Mm.
we're doing uncomfortable things as business owners, especially when it comes to selling and ideas of worthiness and fear and people pleasing and possible rejection, all of that energy, I believe, can really be felt in communications because that energy is behind. So sometimes when people are just neutral and they're generous, that helps them learn how to settle into selling in a way that fits their values and
Mm.
also helps them connect with people. Because if that is there on some level, my own experience is that people don't pick up on, they don't even notice that it's an invitation, right? And in some ways, people are deterred by that kind of like needy
Mm.
energy, grasping energy that comes through in sales messaging. So part of what I do when I work with people is look at like, what are the communications we're sending out into the world? How do you feel about that message? Do you feel that is true? Because truth is ultimately what we all human beings are attracted to. We love stories because they're true. We love vulnerability because it's true. And there are levels of the into our businesses without us even noticing. So that's a really fascinating aspect of what I'm doing.
Yep. So I'm gonna get into like some of the principles that you use, but before that, I'm just curious if we can first touch on just pattern recognition. So, what are really, and I think you've already been surfacing some of these, like really common barriers and issues that you see in out there in the business world, particularly with the people that you help, right, with your clients. But then you also have a lot of work experience, so you've lived through many experiences in the arts, the world of the arts, and consulting and nonprofits, some other spaces. Yeah, so common barriers and issues that you observe in your present or past working life.
Sure. The number one thing I'm encountering right now, and as I get into prosperity more and more, what I'm finding
Mm.
is a distance between what people have in their vision for what they want to live, what they want to experience, what they want to accomplish, and then also, and not just achievements, but fulfillment and purpose and satisfaction, and then what they're currently doing, and recognizing that how they want to feel when that is done doesn't match how they've been feeling about work or how they've been feeling about
Mm.
how it's been going for a little while. And most
Mm.
people who maybe aren't curious, they're looking just for stability. Nothing wrong with stability. But I find that if you're on the stability track, like what's beneath that is worth unpacking, because
Mm.
if you know you want to do something, but it doesn't seem stable, I think that's worth examining. So I'm way off track here from overworking, but overworking is a really big thing. And what I've noticed is
Mm.
that people overwork out of desire to make a difference. People overwork out of a desire to accomplish something, to be recognized, or to because they fear if they don't, they will lose their job, they will be criticized, their clients won't show up anymore, they will lose business, they will lose face, they will fail to deliver on people's expectations. So for me, overworking is the number one pattern, overworking. The reasons why we do that are usually about fear of lack, guilt, people pleasing, shame, all of those things, which are just feelings. But this is where we can use energy as a tool, because if we're aware that there's something that is creating behaviors that do not serve us in the long run, if we are people pleasers and we don't go to sleep because we maybe that email will come in and people need us that moment, but that is that actually accurate? So we fall into a lot of these behaviors habitually and subconsciously, unconsciously, just not even noticing that we are. And it's actually those repetitive behaviors that are built on implicit expectations or limiting beliefs and generational patterns and our own lived experiences, and maybe even a little bit of karma, things that have taught us to do things or not to do them a certain way. And in the background, it's a very complex ecosystem of things that motivate us or things that stop us. But unless we have a time and a reason to really slow down and examine, we tend to, as human beings, just keep going, doing the thing that we're doing. And again, it seems stable that we're doing that. But when you really look at what happens in a business, it's like whether or not you're in a giant company or a tiny one person organization, there's so many layers of things happening personally, interpersonally, mentally, emotionally, and action wise, that it's really a complex ecosystem. And I have a lot of respect for anyone who is working. Also have respect for people who aren't working, but like a business
Mm.
is a really complex thing. And that's where this idea of creating, co-creating with the entity of business and really thinking about the consciousness of everybody involved, including your clients, your customers, your vendors, the people who you're buying services from, and even the software platforms we're using. There's a whole consciousness that we're starting to work on, that we are definitely working with when we do our business.
Mm.
And especially now with AI, it's like there's a consciousness, but not a consciousness. So that's also an
Mm.
interesting thing, especially since now there's so much fear that I'm hearing, or people who are like, this is the greatest tool ever. So it's just a really complex thing, but the patterns are definitely overworking. And then the things that stop us as humans and that block us from our greatness are the things that block us from greatness in business.
Yeah. Well, so let me bring something up here. So I'm definitely guilty of overworking for all of the reasons outlined by you. And at the same time, I really believe that the magic is in the details, right? But then there's, I think, a tension and some balance to be achieved between overworking and magic in the details, like sweating the details. And something I have noticed is when I overwork, it detracts from connection with the customer. And I mean, that's partially because I've invested a lot of time doing this overwork. So now my energy's off because like I'm tense and in fear and like whatever else is showing up on that moment. And then there is that subtle difference or barrier of a limitation in being able to connect with the customer in a deeper, more meaningful way because of the vibes and the energy and whatever else. And maybe I'm tired or any number of things that we can outline. I don't know if you have any more thoughts to add about connecting with the people that we're serving.
Well, the people we're serving starts with our own energy. So if you are depleted,
Mm-hmm.
you are going to have a hard time connecting. That's just essentially my interpretation of what you just said, Ezekiel. So if you are dry and you're a well, there's not a whole lot you can do for for your customers because there's nothing there. So I think for me, it's more a question of why are we blocked? Why are we lacking? And essentially, every business challenge I solve has to do with some sort of lack on some level, or an awareness or a fear. I work with people who work with billionaires who are obsessed with not having enough. And obviously, that's a delusion. Like, there's plenty, but
Mm-hmm.
there's something in the body that says there's not enough. You're going to have trouble really being present and connecting. And the game changer I've seen in my clients over the last 2 years is an understanding that what we're trained is action is the answer and logic is the answer. And we are obsessed with productivity. This overworking seminar I did on Wednesday night, I talked about 4 archetypes of overworking. And there's the perfectionist, the people pleaser, there's the prosperity blocker, and I forget the fourth one right now. But all of these start with behaviors and fears and inner beliefs. And many of them, oh, productivity addict. That's the one that I wanted to talk about. The productivity addict, there's something about if I only had this system worked out, or if I only could have gotten one more thing done. It's like this never enough is the energy that's behind that. So when we're
Mm-hmm.
looking at productivity, sometimes, and on the call, somebody said, actually, things went really well for the first time, and I had an anxiety attack. And that to me also shows that this habitual nature of not enough in business is so pervasive that when we succeed, our body doesn't know how to handle it. Like, whoa, that is something to notice and just be aware of, right? So when we talked about the ideal nurtured version of this particular person, they said the thing that came to me was love. And love seems like something we should not be talking about in business. Is that appropriate? And I don't mean love for people. I just mean love in the abstract, like having a full heart, which is full energy. When we are feeling a sense of love, we are never in lack. So even if that means remembering our cat or remembering a nice moment with a person 20 years ago or remembering a place in nature that we really love, any place where we can feel full and then go to work ends up being a more prosperous stance, a more prosperous place than anything else we could do. So with this particular client who was not feeling like success was safe in their body, what we came to was love and comfort are the things that person needs to experience. And that's actually more productive than the most sophisticated productivity system ever. That productivity hack they were looking for was love and comfort. So I believe when you show up full and in your fullness of energy that represents all the possibilities and fullness, wholeness, not lack, not I'm not enough, or there isn't enough time. And time, by the way, the biggest evidence that I've seen pretty much in humanity for lack, right? Very few people feel abundant in time. But when you have the time
Mm-hmm.
equation solved, everything else really opens up. So I really see this idea of being whole and full. When you're whole and full, you serve everyone best, but you don't do that without filling yourself first. And that's counterintuitive for the overservers, overgivers, and the people pleasers. And like
Yeah.
I've been and still am vestiges of all of these archetypes. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not that I'm so evolved and I've moved past this. And definitely test out and question anything that I say for yourself because I'm not a guru. I'm just trying to help people find solutions using energy. And I'm sharing what I've learned from myself and from working
Mm-hmm.
with my clients. But how can you be productive if you feel empty? How can you be productive if you feel sad? How can you feel productive and if you don't have a sense of purpose and passion for what you're doing. Not that purpose and passion are necessary, but it makes work a whole lot nicer, and it's a much nicer interaction with whatever corporate body, corporate entity you're interacting with on a daily basis.
Yeah. There's something that was coming up for me as an experiment just to gain some perspective or awareness of time is red lights, like traffic lights.
Mm,
Especially traffic lights that are usually in our commute or on our way because I was just thinking about I observe myself a lot and it's just so interesting when you're like in a rush or cranky or stressed and you're at that traffic light. It just seems to last forever.
yeah.
But sometimes you're like relaxed or whatever, and then the traffic light it just goes. Or if you try to like write a text message while at a red light, it seems to just like be like no time. Like oh my god, it's green already.
Yeah.
So I think that says a lot about our attention and where we're directing our attention and our energy. I think it's just it makes for like an interesting experiment to start gaining some more visibility into ourselves and these parts that we don't recognize, which are a lot of the parts that you're working with.
Yeah,
Um,
and I love that you say that because how we feel directs everything around us. And when we're
yeah.
feeling powerful or when we're feeling ease, things just fall into line. It's like, oh, the I live at a on a street where there's a red light that at the end that is a very
Mm-hmm.
long light, and very rarely do you hit the light just coming out of the driveway and like heading down the street.
Mm-hmm.
But there are those days where it's like, woo, things are going great for me because that light was like, hey, today's your day. Come this way,
Mm-hmm.
come this way.
Mm-hmm.
So I also find that those tend to be the days I'm in a really light mood. I'm not in a rush. I'm not stressed out. I'm just enjoying the journey. That's when the red lights seem to not hit. That's when the green lights seem to hit. So it's also something that could be law of attraction, could be mindset, but I really find that what's happening inside starts to influence what happens outside. And that's why we focus on moving energy inside. And
Yeah.
moving energy, again, can be a different set of thoughts. If we're habituated to success feels like stress in the body, we want to really overwrite that program. And the easy way to do that is called neuroplasticity, which is you just install
Mm-hmm.
different thoughts. You install different
Mm-hmm.
thoughts until they become habituated. And I'm all about operationalizing. So if there's a segment of your day where you can practice a new thought or practice a new feeling or practice new expectations in quick order, and I'm a musician, so like when you practice, you get better at something. So I like to operationalize practicing something that is maybe doesn't look like it has a direct business outcome, but it's actually these
Mm-hmm.
small adjustments and habits of mind that change our lives, that change our
Yeah.
work, that shift huge
Mm-hmm.
things inside us. And I have a
Yeah.
client right now who has really gotten into this idea of time mastery. And this is somebody
Mm-hmm.
who came to me 2 years ago, obsessed with productivity. And now this person, and afraid of death, right? Afraid of death. Like we've had
Mm-hmm.
four
Oh.
conversations, 4 hour long, hour and a half long coachings just about death. And
Mm-hmm.
this fear of like, what if I'm not done? What will happen to my family? What if?
Mm-hmm.
So it's been so interesting doing some of the prosperity work and really questioning time prosperity and saying, like, let's work on that. They've really dug in. And now they're in a place where it's like, I feel wealthy in time. I know I have enough
Mm-hmm.
time. I can be relaxed when I think about the things in front of me. And it's all a
Mm-hmm.
continuum. What happened before, what's happening now, what's going to happen in the future. And they had this dream where this tidal wave was coming to swallow up their family and they could see it coming. And then when we first started working together, they would have freaked out and like tried to save everybody and like just like the chaos of it all. But instead, they told me that they just recognized that they weren't going to make it. They got real calm. And then the next thing they saw was themselves like floating in the water, like feet first. But they didn't have any sort of feeling about it. It was just like, oh, yeah, okay, well,
Mm-hmm.
here we are. And it just was such peace. And for me, that's like accepting and trusting self and trusting universe on such a deep level that productivity, it's kind of like when you trust, that energy is way more powerful than the like, ah, what about this? What about that? So at the moment, they're just like really getting into this thing about like time. Time is a gift, but the more you are relaxed and purposeful and really higher than the things that are happening to you, you have a different experience with time.
Yeah.
In the big
There's a
leap, they
couple.
call it Einstein time, that it can expand when you're really
Hmm.
in the zone. And like, let's get in the zone. That's energy, right? Getting in the zone,
Yeah.
being in flow, that's energy.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that are floating here that you touched on that I want to make sure that we connect. You touched on neuroplasticity and installing new thoughts. And then at some point you also mentioned ancestral trauma. And I think some of the thoughts that need to be replaced are partially come from the ancestral trauma. Can we spend
Yeah,
just a minute unpacking that here?
sure. Yeah, a lot of the prosperity blocks and a lot of the overworking patterns definitely didn't start with us. And here's the thing, I have so much respect for our ancestors. They had
Yeah.
very few choices, if any, in
Mm-hmm.
most situations. We are very privileged. We have loads of choices. Even like what this kind of technology has done for our ability to choose is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to like honor the ancestors, and through them, there are certain programs and patterns that got selected for that helped the species survive. So we have the opportunity now, and I just had a client I was speaking to with my group on Wednesday who said, I realized that my mother had this pattern of overworking, overserving, depleting herself, putting herself last. And I realized I'd been in the same pattern kind of as habit and as expectation. And it was worth slowing down. And in the work that we were doing together, they really noticed that that they had a choice as to whether they wanted to repeat that or not. But a lot of this stuff is just so implicit. Like when we're growing up, it's like culture. Culture in a company
Mm-hmm.
is kind of like culture in a family. The things that we suffer from, the things that we suffer about, tend to not have started with us, but we don't talk about them explicitly. They're just things that we notice and we start to mimic or start to bring into our bodies and believe are true without questioning them. So the idea of healing is we just slow things down, and we, from that place of not being in it and not in the suffering, but like if we can lift a layer, we have a different perspective. And from that perspective, so many more things are available to us, like making a choice. Like maybe that's not a behavior I need to repeat because maybe that behavior was survival behavior and my business
Mm-hmm.
is doing really well. So now I have the luxury, I have the privilege to decide how I want to spend my time, how I want to delegate to my team, how I want to nurture myself, how I want to treat myself. And what we're exploring now is how you treat yourself is how your clients are going to treat you, how your audiences are going to treat you, how your beneficiaries, your customers are going to treat you, how your partners are going to treat you, your family members, the friends you have in your life. And something that came up in my last group program was a loving, heartful community for 14 weeks. At the end of the program, I had three people say to me, I really love this container. I really love being in this community. I realize I don't have friends like this. Can we talk about strategies to get a bunch of friends in my life who will be nurturing and loving and supportive and be part of my growth? I was like, well, people in this group you can start with, but certainly we can talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
But when we start to level up in how we don't habitually just repeat patterns, but we're thoughtful and intentional, and we show up for ourselves and do the work and release, then we are also helping the ancestors. And by the way, part of that program, I do ancestral healing, I do generational healing. And
Yeah.
so that's a big part of it, that we're talking about how this thing shows up in us. And also, we're doing work to help and
Mm-hmm.
release and heal 7 generations prior. So it's a really powerful thing. But yeah, ancestral, like what we learned from our parents, that stuff, and we pass that on, and that stuff doesn't die, right? But it can if it's the stuff we choose not to repeat. And all of my clients are pattern breakers. They're not there
Yeah.
they're there because they recognize something is happening that is causing suffering and they don't want to suffer anymore. And logic didn't help them. And so this is an extra tool that is available to help people be more thoughtful, intentional, and to choose more how it is that they would like to experience life and work.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. We place a disproportionate amount of value on logic. Logic is valuable, but I
It
think the
is.
underneath the emotions and all these intuitions, everything like that you might label like the subconscious. It is so powerful. It will. It's like it's not even that it eats logic for lunch. It's like logic is not even
Yeah,
a snack
that's right.
for the subconscious.
Yeah.
So you really have to do the work in there. Otherwise, it's really hard to get anywhere.
Well, and that's the nice thing about using energy as a tool. And my own experience is that when you can be aware, and most of us don't ever slow down enough or get quiet enough to study or notice what's happening and have enough distance from our senses and our feelings to understand that we have a choice because we are not the things that we're thinking. We're not the things that
Yeah.
we're feeling. We are not the people who are showing up. We are not our stress. We are not our body. Like there's so many layers to that. We're so much more than that. And we're so much more powerful than that. But yeah, the subconscious, we're unconscious beings in a lot of ways because if we had to think about how to brush our teeth every time and we had to expend logic on that, wow, we would not be as
Mm-hmm.
efficient as beings. But we also are running a lot of stuff in the background. And unless we slow down, we don't notice that our fear of not being liked means that we don't want to sell because we don't want to be rejected, and that's actually hurting business, right? So it's
Yeah.
when it shows up like that, if we have the courage or we have the tools to slow down in a supported, guided, lovingly supported way. I always say I hold
Mm-hmm.
space with love for all of the possibilities that we haven't considered, as well as for the pain that we've been going through. It's just a powerful thing to, it's an act of resistance in some ways. It's an act of power to really look at what's happening inside, not with shame or guilt or fear,
Mm-hmm.
but just curiosity. And when you go with curiosity, so much is possible because it's all malleable. It's everything is so soft, as I heard you say once. So
Yeah. So we've talked about these pattern recognition. So can you quickly outline the principles that you use? And maybe at the end we can just point people to where they can go read about those principles in more depth. But so what are the principles that you lean on to do your work?
So, what are the principles I lean on? So, the most basic one, I do pranic healing. Pranic healing
Mm-hmm.
is prana is energy, chi. If you've seen people do tai chi, they're moving energy. If you've done yoga or hot yoga, the way you feel afterwards, you feel that way because you've moved energy. And yoga means union. So, and I do a kind of yoga called Arhatic yoga, which is an integrative form of a bunch of different kinds of yoga for the modern business person. But the principles of pranic healing are you cleanse and then you energize. And so the thing about that, it's so simple, but when you energize, you just send something energy without cleaning it first. You amplify what's in there, which means whatever's in there that may be a little negative or not as clean as you want it to be amplifies. So we clean, and what happens, and this happens in my group programs, we clean and we are looking at that cleansing on a physical, mental, and emotional level. And when we are clean, like we're not walking around with all of the thought garbage that we're not consciously creating, but which we're doing all day, every day, most of us. I can say for sure this was me, especially when I was in a former part in my life in music school, very self-critical, very nasty to myself and my thoughts. So we clean that out. And what we do is when we clean it, we can put in energy, fresh, clean energy that doesn't match what was in there before, but that actually is a higher frequency. And when we can put that energy in at a higher frequency, we're starting to level up. So, in addition to installing new programs in our brain, like neuroplasticity, like maybe a nicer thought rather than a more critical thought, we start to walk around as different people because we're not just reactivating the lower suffering energy that we've been carrying around with us or that's been holding us back. And for my family, that's like criticism of yourself, criticism of other people, criticism of situations, criticism of systems. Criticism is, it has a place, but my own experience was that was a pattern that was really keeping me in a suffering loop. So I decided to start to learn what was the opposite of that and start to rewrite the inner programs. And now I'm doing this and helping people in these ways. But I would just say that the main principle I use is cleanse, then energize. And then there are four root causes to blocked prosperity, which are the principles that I teach in my group program. And those are also the principles that we talk about in when I do one-on-one work. And those are the blocks to prosperity include limiting beliefs, which we talked about. Those can be yours. If you do not believe that wealth is a good thing, you will never be wealthy because you're literally your belief system will reject that. Like my client who said things were going well and my body freaked out, right? So there's a limiting belief there that we were gently able to bring a new understanding to. And moving mental energy is incredibly important because not everything is feeling. It starts with thoughts. So limiting beliefs are thoughts you've kept thinking that limit possibilities. And most of us are not conscious of ours till we observe others having different ones. Second thing is generational patterns, which we've talked about. If you have a family history of a certain disease or certain behaviors around money, like I had a client who their mother spent everything, could not keep money, and the father owned a casino and had a lot of wealth. But this idea of having it and losing it and having it and losing it was something that this person started to repeat in their lives because
Mm.
there were generational patterns and
Mm.
also a belief system about how money worked. It was if you had it, you had to hold on to it because it was hard to keep, right? So there we
Mm.
have both limiting beliefs and generational patterns together. There's also lived experiences. Most people have experienced trauma. Trauma shapes and shakes up our belief systems. It creates new sets of patterns that limit us and that are painful, right? So, and human beings like to avoid pain for good reason, right? That's actually a good thing at one level until it stops us, until it ends up being something that deters us from being our full, intelligent, powerful, loving selves. And then the fourth one is karma. And karma, a lot of people are like, oh, if you don't believe in past lives, it doesn't matter if you believe in past lives or not. The idea is karma is cause and effect. If it is not for you, it will never happen no matter what. Like if you haven't earned it on some level, like there are things we can't explain. And also there are things we can't explain, like why bad things happen to good people. So for me, the answer is karma. But at karma, when I teach people about how to use the law of karma, it's like gravity. If you don't understand the law of gravity, you're going to have a lot of trouble. But once you understand how it works, it is consistent 100% of the time. You just work with it instead of trying to fight against it. So when we're looking at karma, we always look at like, what are you living? What is the fruit you're harvesting that you don't like? And if you're planting corn, you're not going to get mangoes. So if you want mangoes, start planting mango trees. If you want corn and your corn keeps coming up, keep planting corn. But all you have to do at a certain point is just plant something different. But if we're not aware that, oh, I have a pattern of harvesting mangoes when really what I want is corn, you're going to be continuing to be unsatisfied with what's happening in your life, but you have more power than you think you do. So if you're harvesting people pleasing and that is not giving you a sense of healthy boundaries and rest, maybe it is and chasing every opportunity or fear of putting yourself out there because maybe somebody won't like you. And I say these all with like complete and utter vulnerability because I have lived all of these archetypes.
Mm.
But really, when you are empowered to see that you have the ability to shape cause and effect, you just change the cause, you change the seeds to match whatever fruit you want. And that's an oversimplification, but this is very powerful stuff. It is very powerful and it is timeless. So, and a lot of the work that we do, we also look at how can we repair our karma, even if it's something we don't know about. You can do things to accelerate your goodwill, your positive impact in the world. Because it is true, from what I've lived, if you cause harm on purpose repeatedly, you don't get away with that. At some level, somewhere, sometime, you've caused suffering, so it'll come back. And it's just the golden rule. Treat others as you want to be treated. And if you want magic in your life, you got to create magic for others. If you want money, you've got to give money away. If you want to be loved, you have to love. And that starts with loving yourself. If you want to trust that everything's going to be okay, you have to trust yourself, where it's all connected. So those are the four things, the four principles that I work with, in addition to cleanse and energize.
Yeah. So, we got a couple more quick stops here before we wrap our conversation, Marty. Of course, today you are on Making Business Art. And on episode number 2, we talked about all your musical training and some trauma that you picked up along the way, courtesy of some harsh teachers. But you already touched on this earlier in the conversation. Are there skills or ways of being as a musician that you apply to your work today?
Yes, I'll say the first one is showing up for myself. So as a musician, if you don't show up, things don't happen. Like if you, I play the oboe, which means you tune the orchestra. If you walk on the stage at 9:29 and you have to tune the orchestra, you're late, you let everybody down. So showing up for yourself, but even before you do that, you have to show up in the practice room to get the music under your fingers so that you can go and do your part. And orchestra is very interesting because it's knowing your part and doing your part, being prepared, playing it till you get it right, even when it feels foreign as you're just getting used to something or you haven't mastered it yet. But then you show up in space and everyone else who has gone through their preparation, you create something that is not designed to last. You create something that moves a lot of energy, that moves a lot of emotions. It's a lot of mental energy. It's a very exciting thing. But if you don't show up, it doesn't happen. If the audience doesn't show up, it's a different energy. So there's all sorts of things about performing arts that are so much about energy, but we just implicitly know that. We don't actually usually talk about it. But yeah, I think for me, I learned the value of showing up because when you are willing to, as a person, show up for yourself repeatedly, it will be easy to show up for other people. And that's what we call integrity, right? So for me, integrity is easy. I have a friend who says, Marta, we make plans like 6 or 8 weeks out, but I know that you are going to show up. If we talked about it, you're going to be there. I don't have to text you to confirm. I just know you're going to be there. And I'm like, oh, is that a thing that people don't do? He's like, yeah, in Miami, people cancel or they push back or
Mm-hmm.
they flake out. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm just so used to showing up. I could not be successful as a business person in doing what I'm doing if I'm just like, oh, we're not healing today. I'm not feeling like it. And that's a question I get a lot, like, oh, you're healing all day long. Don't you get depleted? And the answer is, I show up for myself. I fill my container. I do my spiritual practice. I have big energy because I show up every day to my spiritual practice and I get full. So I'm channeling rather than having it come out of my own body. And in that way, it's a nourishing, regenerating, replenishing thing. But that just starts with showing up and knowing your part. And here's where things are different from me as opposed to that time, which is I showed up and I knew my part, but I always thought I was right about because my
Mm-hmm.
part was done, my part was ready. The
Mm-hmm.
space I'm in now, whatever truth people are showing up with is true. And I'm not right. And I'm constantly saying, you have to decide for yourself. You have to have the discernment. And we work on
Yeah.
things through which people start to notice they have different discernment. Like, oh, I noticed that partner actually doesn't treat me with the same way the things
Mm-hmm.
that I treat them with. It's like, oh, well, what about that? So my job is
Mm-hmm.
really to hold space with love, to use the protocols and practices because pranic healing is protocol based. It is my spiritual teacher who created the system is an engineer, so it's very intelligent. And I just keep looking at his body of work, and it's just massive and so sophisticated and so simple. Anyone can do it, and that's part of the beauty. But yeah, I think showing up and being consistent, just being willing to do hard things until you master them. I'm starting my third cohort of my program in May, and I had so much fun. The first time I was doing it and I felt excited and happy about it, but the second time, really cool thing, like I added a community element and people were really bonding and loving on each other. And now I'm just like, ooh, I don't usually repeat things in terms of programs in my business. So this has given me a little bit of excitement and mastery, not because I've mastered it, but because I feel like the model is really responsive and really working. And I know people are getting results. One person manifested $110,000 in 3 weeks. So things are pretty fantastic. And that has to do with me not just being an artist and like, what is it I want to explore now? And having a little bit of showing up for myself and learning how to master how to talk about the work and having enough experience doing that particular program that I can speak for certain about the things that have happened in the past and what might happen in the future. But yeah, and you got to know your part, but you got to show up. You got to show up for yourself and show up for others. But no, I never feel depleted because what I do, it's transformation, which is the most joyful thing possible in my book.
Yeah.
So I come home energized. My husband's like, okay, chill out a little bit. It's nighttime. So, but I can't help
Well,
it. I just love it.
you mentioned something earlier that made me think of something that we talked about at length in episode 2, which is process over goals. I don't know if you want to add a couple notes to that.
Well, it's what I was saying earlier, which is if you can operationalize a little bit of self-love, self-development, growth, self-study, then you're going to be a different person. And yes, smart goals were never my thing. I just think that is so, it's so organized and so logical, but it lacks heart, in my opinion. And I guess it depends on whose hands it's in, right? But that was something that I experienced as punitive corporate culture rather than something that was really invested and involved in an exchange of energy and really thinking about and this is maybe why I'm my own business owner, what the corporation wants me to accomplish isn't always what I felt was the right thing. And that can be very confusing to feel like you have a purpose and you have a place and you want to do what you want to do, of course, to serve and help make the place where you're working, make their work better and more impactful and better serve the clients that are there. But for me, goals, of course, you have to have goals. That's a given. But maybe it's just like as a musician, you manifest for a living. Like you take a thing that does not exist except on a one-dimensional or two-dimensional piece of paper, and you make it into an experience that touches people and makes them cry sometimes, or that leaves them uplifted, or that leaves them wanting to talk about things they've never talked about with somebody. And you don't create music through smart goals. The goal is obvious. You're going to learn to play the piece so that you can have enough technical agility that you can perform it, but then there's a level of other energy that you put into it because it's something you're sharing with care and beauty. Not all music is beautiful, but it's still, there's a lot of heart that goes into that work. So for me, it's like process. You have to know how you're going to be successful, not just have a goal. Because if you have a goal, but you don't know how to get there, then it never becomes. Whereas if you think about, again, like the smallest possible unit that you can create change through, and whether that's a nicer thought in your brain or deciding how you want to approach work, what your boundaries are for friends, or deciding what it is you want to live in terms of your revenue next year, the goal is obvious. Like if you don't have the goal, then you're not going towards something. And it's okay if you don't go towards something, but here's the cool thing. If you just do a small thing every day, a small thing of generosity, a small thing of joy, a small thing of fun, a small thing of service, over time you create a body of work based on that thing. And that is the thing that starts to create tangible results in your life. So creating through process is how you manifest. If you want to manifest something, practice it doing it in small nuggets because that's also how things move from the inner world to the physical world.
Yeah. Last stop, Marte. What
Yeah.
are just 1 to 2 tips of you can leave listeners with something that they can do to start addressing if they have identified with anything that they've heard here in terms of just recognizing something that's getting in their way or recognizing that they have a different choice and they can head in a different direction. What are 1 or 2 things that people can, like 1 or 2 practices people can do to help them start to point in a direction that's more desirable for them?
Well, my favorite thing is the 5 minute self review. And this is something I do every day. I just look at what is showing up for me. And usually I have something that I want to work on, something in myself that is about shedding layers of pain, like this idea of loving kindness and non-injury. And these come from my spiritual practice, Master Choa Sui, my teacher. If you are being kind to yourself and then also kind to others, it's helpful to know that you're working on that thing. So when I work on one of these virtues, I work on it for 3 months because I'm not Benjamin Franklin. I'm not doing 13 things every day and judging myself against trying to master 13 things at once, which is extremely difficult. Even a musician would find that very extremely difficult, in my opinion. So I look at how was I loving and kind to myself? How injurious was I to myself? And then the same to others. And
Hmm.
by just giving yourself a tiny window of time to self-reflect and say, like, okay, I made some mistakes. I'm not going to beat myself up. I'm just going to acknowledge them. I'm going to imagine what it looks like and feels like for me to choose something else. And then I'm going to move on. That's a really helpful practice. And very quickly, you will evolve as a person. And that's kind of like that unit of self-study, that unit of over time, you have a body of work. You have progressed because this is inner work that we often just don't make time for. So, the 5 minute self review. Also, meditation on Twin Hearts changed my life. I have a recording on my YouTube channel. I have a lot of my work for free on YouTube, a lot of my seminars, a lot of my just free meditations and prosperity healings and that kind of thing, and other informational stuff in the past I've just kept there. So feel free to do that. But yeah, meditation on Twin Hearts is my teacher's gift to the world. It is very
Oh,
simple and very powerful and life changing. So those are the two practices that I think if you show up for yourself and show up for others in that way, you are going to be a different person because you are doing inner remodeling. And anytime you do that, anytime you invest in yourself, you get results on the outside because that is how energy works. What happens inside starts to happen outside. That's why you feel a cold coming on, and then it's in you, and then sometimes it's outside of you, right? It moves through you. And this is how we create a life of purpose. This is how we create a life of joy. This is how we create work that is satisfying, beautiful, fun, and super prosperous.
nice. Well, Marty, thank you for being a friend of making business art. I just have to acknowledge and shout you out for being like, I possibly the biggest cheerleader of this project. So thank you for coming back and sharing what you're doing. And in closing, can you just let people know why should somebody look you up and where can they find you?
Why should they look me up? I guess if anything resonated with them on this podcast, that might be a reason why. I'm I'm here to serve. I'm really here to be a missionary for energy as a tool for business. So if that resonates for you, with you, in you, or in somebody else you're thinking of as you're listening, then you're invited to send me an email. I'm at hello@thebusinesshealer.com. You can also visit my website, thebusinesshealer.com. I have a 14-week prosperity program, which is a group program. It is so heartful, it is so joyful, and it is so powerful. And I have another
Mhm.
cohort starting in May. I do them twice or three times a year so far. That may change, but I'm really loving it right now. So if you think that program might be for you, if you have questions for it, anybody can set up a 30-minute meeting on my calendar to talk through what you've heard. And it's service is part of my model. I believe in generous business, and so that's really how I show up. And I'm here to hear what any of your viewers might have question-wise or to share for them what it is I can help them with to move and transform what's happening inside to help them get different results on the outside. And thank you, Ezekiel, for having me. It's always a joy to speak with you. I love our conversations, whether they're online or in this form or just in person. It's really an honor, and I love what you're doing, the podcast. I'm so grateful for how you are serving our community of curious people who love business and art. So thank you for your leadership and for showing up.
All right, Marty. Well, we'll see you again soon. But thank you so much for being on here today.
Pleasure. Thank you.